from KQED.
You've probably heard about the effort to recall Governor Gavin Newsom. It's actually not the first time someone's tried to do it, but this attempt has gotten way bigger than anyone thought it would.
This did not begin as a purely Republican recall. I don't think, if you had said 6 months ago that this thing would actually qualify for the ballot, I don't think they would have believed it.
The deadline to collect signatures is Wednesday, and campaign organizers think they'll have enough to trigger a recall election. Today, the campaign to recall Governor Newsom, and what it says about this moment in California politics. I'm Alan Montecillo. Welcome to the Bay.
Support for this podcast comes from Lucky & Lucky California, featuring Lucky You Rewards with featuring offers, coupons, and points. Good at neighborhood Lucky & Lucky California stores. Guests can sign up on the Lucky mobile app, in-store, or online at luckysupermarkets.com. And from the Asian Art Museum, at Team Lab Continuity, visitors can become part of a wondrous ecosystem of lush natural imagery that dynamically evolves around them. For more information and ticket reservations, visit asianart.org.
Recall organizers this week said that they have 2 million signatures. That's important because, A, the deadline for collecting signatures is March 17th, which is coming up, and also because they need 1.5 million or so valid signatures to get it on the ballot.
Scott Shafer is the senior editor of KQED's Politics and Government Desk and the co-host of the Political Breakdown podcast.
They got a real big break back in November because the deadline was going to be in November 17th, but they went to a judge up in Sacramento and said, hey, because of this pandemic, it's really hard to collect signatures in person. Won't you give us some more time? And the judge gave them another 120 days. They have made good use of the time that they've had the last few months to collect signatures, and it looks very well like we might have a recall election sometime later this year, probably in October or November. There are always efforts to recall the governor in California, no matter who the governor is. And there have been, 5 or 6 attempts previous to this one to recall Gavin Newsom, and they just peter out, partly because they're expensive. You have to have a fair amount of money, and I'm talking like millions of dollars, to put the people out on the streets, the volunteers or the paid signature gatherers, in order to get that many signatures. I mean, it's relatively easy in California to put a recall on the ballot, but you still, in this case, you need 1.5 million signatures, and those don't just fall off trees. You've got to go out and collect them.
As you just mentioned, this is not the first time someone has attempted to gather signatures to recall Governor Newsom or any other governor. Can you describe just how this one is different?
What's different is the pandemic. And it's a pandemic that everybody understands, everyone's been affected by. You start off with sort of the low-hanging fruit, which is Republicans who didn't vote for Newsom to begin with. So they're probably more predisposed to say, sure, let's get rid of him and replace him with a Republican. Republicans in some of the more rural counties in California who don't like masks. But then you've got small business people who have been, very deeply hurt economically. They've lost their businesses. They've been forced to shut down restaurants and bars and nail salons and hair salons and gyms. You've got parents whose kids are at home on Zoom, and they have to choose between staying home with their kids or keeping their jobs. And so for all kinds of reasons, people who, wouldn't particularly be interested in a recall or wouldn't sign a petition or, maybe who are even Democrats or moderates. You've got people like that who are just, really open to the idea of sort of punishing the governor because they feel punished by this pandemic and some of his policies.
What have you heard from people who've decided to sign on to this?
So with the deadline for signature gathering coming up, I wanted to take a look at, the campaign and who's involved and how voters are feeling. With the pandemic, Alan, we've been largely at home, and I haven't been out talking to voters the way we would in ordinary times. But I wanted to, see how people in the Bay Area, but a little further afield, are feeling. And so I went up to Vacaville last weekend, Saturday, and there were several recall Newsom rallies, and I went to one that was in front of City Hall in downtown Vacaville. There were about 25 volunteers there. Some of them were wearing shirts that looked like the American flag. And one of the people I talked to was signing a recall petition, and so I just went up to him and asked him why. His name was David Verza. 32 years old. He's a Republican.
I live in Fairfield, the next town over.
Okay, and tell me what you're doing. But he just felt that he and his family were very personally being hurt by the pandemic and by the governor's policies.
And me personally, and the people in my friend group, family group, we're having a hard time here, and it just feels like Newsom isn't helping us out at all. It feels like he doesn't care, when we see him.
One of the things he mentioned was this dinner that Newsom had at French Laundry, which is a very fancy, swanky, incredibly expensive restaurant in Yountville, which is in Napa Valley. Newsom was there, spotted in November, not wearing a mask. He was having dinner with some lobbyists and some friends. And this was right at the time that he's telling restaurants to close or people to socially distance and not to gather with different households. And so, David Verza was saying, well, it's okay for him to do that, but it's not okay for us. And it just, for a lot of people, it just was a tipping point.
When we see him eating in restaurants and doing stuff like that, it really shows where his loyalties lie,
The hypocrisy and the elitism just kind of shot off the charts. And it just really accelerated this recall campaign, and it really motivated a lot of people like David Verza to sign the petition.
Scott, at this point, the campaign says they have at least 2 million signatures. But then there's also just the role of the bigger institutions like local Republican organizations and the state Republican Party. So what role have they played in this attempt to recall Governor Newsom?
Well, this did not begin as a purely Republican recall.
We saw that there was a movement there, and we joined on to it because it's the right thing to do for Californians.
As it picked up steam, the state Republican Party, and I talked to Jessica Milan Patterson, the chair, she realized, whoa, this thing is really serious. They don't want to just hitch their wagon to any and every recall effort because they know most of them fail. But when she saw that this thing was actually taking off, the Republican Party wanted to be part of it.
I think that's certainly a great thing for the party. It's something that we can rally around. It's also something that we can talk to California voters about.
It's an organizing tool. It gives them a reason in an off year when there wasn't supposed to be an election to attract volunteers, to keep volunteers busy, to register new voters, irrespective of the recall, because there are some congressional seats that are going to be up in 2022 in purple districts. And this campaign to recall Newsom is giving them an opportunity to put some of the infrastructure in place that will help them re-elect some of these freshman Republicans who picked up seats from Democrats in 2020.
We have a huge opportunity, depending on how redistricting goes, to be a major player in taking back the House. Building the infrastructure and having that in place before we get into 2022, I think it's going to be critical to wins.
It sort of strikes me that we're talking about the period of November to today when the number of signatures really started to pick up. And in that time, there was also, the defeat of former President Trump and attempted insurrection at the Capitol. And I wonder if you're a Republican, whether you were all in on that or not, or whether you maybe sort of distance yourself from it a little bit, there's value in just unifying around the attempt to recall Newsom specifically as like a way to move forward in a sense.
Absolutely. I mean, Donald Trump and his brand of republicanism are very unpopular in California. I mean, Joe Biden kicked Trump's butt. He won by more than 5 million votes in November. So to the extent that the recall or the Republican Party in California are identified with Donald Trump, that is not good for them. And so the recall gives them something else to organize around. And in fact, Gavin Newsom and the people that are trying to support him are going to tie the recall to Donald Trump. And to the extent that they're successful in doing that, the more they can tie the recall to Donald Trump, the less likely it is to be successful.
I want to transition now to what would actually happen if there are enough verified signatures and a recall election is actually triggered in October or November. What would it take for that election to actually result in Governor Newsom getting kicked out of office?
So if there's a special election for a recall, the ballot will have two questions. The first question is, should Gavin Newsom be recalled from office? And that's just a simple yes or no. And then there's a question two. If Newsom is recalled, who would you like to be the next governor? It's whoever the top vote getter is will be the governor if, in fact, a majority vote to recall Newsom. So you could become governor with 25, 30% of the vote. That's very doable for a Republican if the Republican vote isn't all divided up and split up. So this is, perhaps the best shot they have at winning a statewide office. But unless 50% plus one vote to recall Newsom, the second part of that ballot is irrelevant. And so that's really what Newsom is betting on, is that less than half of voters will actually want to see him recalled from office. Newsom really wants to make sure that no credible Democrat is on that second part of the ballot, that he doesn't want to give a credible alternative to Democrats. So right now, he's really focused on keeping the party united against the recall.
Are there already candidates who've declared that they're running?
Yeah, there are at least two people who have said they're running. One of them is former Republican San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, and he's a moderate, I would say a moderate Republican, although he did vote for Donald Trump in 2020. That could become a problem for him later on. And John Cox, who is also from San Diego, a businessman who has run several times unsuccessfully for office here in California and Illinois. He was defeated by Gavin Newsom 4 years ago by a crushing number of votes. So he's running again. And so there's going to be, some competition among the Republicans. And you're already seeing some of that division play out. John Cox, for example, has released an ad calling Kevin Faulconer Gavin Faulconer, saying he's just like Gavin Newsom, a career politician, and blah, blah, blah.
Boy.
So, they're
already
go
off to the races. Great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just as Democrats want to keep a prominent Democrat off that second part of the ballot, Republicans are going to try to force out whoever it is they think can't win.
I don't want to necessarily predict what will happen, but do we have any sense right now about whether enough voters really have the appetite for this recall, and if they actually want to recall Governor Newsom?
There's been one statewide sort of credible poll about this, and that was the Berkeley IGS poll a few weeks ago. And it showed a couple things. One, that Newsom's approval rating had fallen, but only 36% of voters said they would vote for the recall. And the other thing is, a lot of the dissatisfaction with Newsom has been around the pandemic. Some of that is his fault, some of it isn't. But as we're beginning to see right now, vaccines are going out, schools are reopening, businesses are reopening, the positivity rate, hospitalizations are going down. It seems that California is turning the corner. And so what Newsom is hoping is that by the time this thing is actually voted on, if it makes the ballot in October or November, the pandemic is going to be, mostly in the rearview mirror. And people are going to be feeling a lot better about the state, about the economy, and about the governor.
So what has Governor Newsom's response to this been so far? How has he handled this recall campaign?
Well, he's been asked many times about the recall at press conferences, and he has always said what, a lot of politicians would say, which is, I'm too busy doing my job.
Let me thank you, Madam Lieutenant Governor, for your kind introduction, and good evening to those of you joining us virtually tonight. Speaker Rendon.
He held his State of the State address this week from Dodger Stadium, and he didn't use the word recall, but it was clear in parts of the speech that he was referring to people who want to recall him from office, and that calling it a power grab, for example, and saying, look, I'm not going to be distracted by that.
So to the California critics out there who are promoting partisan political power grabs with outdated prejudices and rejecting everything that makes California truly great, we say this: we will not be distracted from getting shots in arms and our economy booming again. This is a fight for California's future.
So, he's beginning to realize that this is probably going to happen. It's probably going to be on the ballot. And so he will have to wage a campaign to defeat it. But I think he probably feels that, look, the best way for me to defeat the recall is to do my job and to do it well, to help the state get past this pandemic, to start rebuilding the economy, to get schools reopened. And if I can do that, then people will not vote to recall me from office.
Do we have any sense of whether he is really worried about it privately?
I don't think there's any question that Newsom is focused on this, at least part-time, and he should be. You can't take these things for granted. And so there was criticism of him a few weeks ago when he started relaxing some of the restrictions on things like sports in high schools and that sort of thing, because people felt like, well, the situation hasn't changed. You keep saying it's based on data and science, but things haven't changed that much. Maybe it's really based on politics. And, I'm sure most things that a governor does are based in part on politics. That's just the way it is. So I'm sure that he's very, very mindful of how people are being affected by his policies and on the restrictions, and he's very eager to see the state reopen.
You've covered California politics for a long time. This recall story it's a big story. It feels like a national story too. So I just want to take a moment to kind of reflect on what's happening and what you make of just the relative success of this effort and what it says about California and the Bay Area and state politics in this moment.
I think what I learned is that you can only push people so far. And I think whenever you get people motivated, even if they're generally supportive of, your policies or your party, if you push them far enough, they're going to push back. It's not just partisan politics. It's people who feel frustrated. They wonder if Gavin Newsom is up to the job, and they feel like maybe he's a little too full of himself, and they want to knock him down a peg or two.
Scott, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
The deadline for the recall campaign to submit signatures is Wednesday, March 17th. From there, it's a weeks-long process of verifying whether those signatures are valid and if there will be enough for a special election this fall. Scott Shafer is senior editor of KQED's Politics and Government Desk and the co-host of the Political Breakdown podcast. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We've got new shows that drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We're available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever else you listen. This episode was produced by Asal Asanipur and Erica Cruz Guevara. We also get help every week from Isabeth Mendoza. KQED's podcast leadership team includes Jessica Plachek, Erica Aguilar, Vinnie Tong, Ethan Tobin Lindsay, and Holly Kernan. I'm Alan Montecillo. Thanks for listening to The Bay, and have a good weekend.
What do students really need in order to learn? I'm Ki Sung.
And I'm Nima Gobir, coming at you with a 6th season of Mindshift from KQED.
Mindshift is the show where teachers, parents, and caregivers can discover solutions for raising our kids in the modern era.
Points. It teaches students that all you got to do is get points. You don't actually have to learn. You just have to get points.
Follow Mindshift wherever you get your podcasts. First episode comes out on July 20th.